When you think about Italian ships of the Second World War, images of the Littorio-class battleships or of some finely designed cruisers come to the mind. However, the ships that fought the most during the war and which are often overlooked are the destroyers of the Regia Marina. When Italy entered the Second World War, the Regia Marina could rely on 59 destroyers. These belonged to different classes developed from the early 1920s to the late 1930s. By 1940, they were all considered destroyers, but until 1938, the Italian Navy continued to distinguish between destroyers and scouts, or, as we call it in Italian, esploratori. However, this distinction faded away with the progressive increase in the size of destroyers in all navies around the world. The oldest ships in service were the two units of the Mirabello class. Built during the Great War as scouts, they displaced 1,500 tons and were armed with 8 102mm guns and 6 torpedo tubes. In World War II, due to their obsolescence, the two ships were relegated to secondary duties, and one, the Augusto Ribotti, incredibly survived the war. The first units commissioned after the Great War were the three scouts of the Leone class, very similar to the Mirabello class but slightly bigger in size and displacement. They introduced the standard gun armament of all subsequent Italian destroyers, the 120mm guns in dual mountings. In World War II, the three ships formed the bulk of Italian surface forces in the Red Sea, and they were all scuttled by the time of the fall of Italian East Africa. The first interwar units classified as destroyers, and not as scouts, were the four units of the Sella class, laid down and launched between 1922 and 1927. They displaced 1,200 tons and possessed 4 guns and 4 torpedo tubes. However, this class was not very successful due to machinery problems, limited endurance, low freeboard, stability and seaworthiness issues. 2 ships were sold to Sweden in early 1940, while other 2 operated in the Aegean Sea, also taking part in the operation that led to the raid at Suda Bay in 1941. In the same years, the Regia Marina launched the 4 units of the Sauro class and 8 of the Turbine class. These ships were improved versions of the Sella class, but failed in addressing the stability issues and engine reliability. The 4 Sauro destroyers were in the Red Sea and were all lost by mid-1941. 6 of the Turbine-class destroyers were lost by 1940, while the remaining 2 took part in the Battle of the Convoys, but none of them survived the war. In 1926, the Regia Marina came back to designing a new class of scouts, which will become the Navigatori class, made of 12 ships. These units displaced 2,600 tons at full load and carried 6 120mm guns plus 6 torpedo tubes. Also, the Navigatori suffered from stability issues and initial modifications proved insufficient. From 1938, 10 ships of the class underwent a partial rebuilding program. This included the fitting of a clipper bow and increased beam. This modification solved the stability and seaworthiness problems at the cost of a top speed reduction to 28 knots. The Navigatori class ships saw intensive action during World War II, being at the forefront in the Battle of the Convoys. 6 ships were lost in that struggle, while the rest were lost in September 1943 after the armistice, and only 1 ship survived the war. After the construction of the Navigatori class, the Regia Marina abandoned the scout concept and concentrated solely on destroyers. Between 1929 and 1931, 8 ships of the Freccia and Folgore classes were laid down. These ships can be considered as the transitional design before the new generation of Italian destroyers. They introduced the single funnel arrangement and new design of the command tower. However, you guessed that, they still suffered from stability issues that forced subsequent modifications. This ultimately reduced the top speed to 29-30 knots, making them unsuitable to operate alongside cruisers and fast battleships. These ships mainly fulfilled convoy escort duties and none of them survived the war. The turning point finally came with the Maestrale-class destroyers, laid down in 1931. With increased length and beam combined with a better weight arrangement, these ships finally solved the stability issues and proved to be robust and capable destroyers, giving the footprint for the subsequent classes. After the 4 Maestrale, the Regia Marina laid down 4 ships of the Oriani class in 1936 and 12 ships of the Soldati class in 1937. These ships were practically the same, with the main distinction being the power of the machinery and AA armament. When Italy entered the war, out of the 59 destroyers available, only the 20 ships of the Maestrale, Oriani and Soldati classes were able to operate alongside the battle fleet, essentially for their superior speed and seaworthiness. From 1940 to 1942, these units were used to escort cruisers and battleships in all the operations of the main surface forces. However, from mid-1942, given the attrition caused to the older destroyers by the relentless fight, they were progressively moved to convoy escort duties. During the Tunisian campaign, several destroyers were used to transport men and supplies to the North African shores. To cope with the wartime losses, in late 1940 and early 1941, the Regia Marina laid down 7 new Soldati-class destroyers, but only 5 entered service. During the war, all Italian destroyers saw their AA armament improved to different degrees, like increasing the number of 20mm guns or introducing or adding new 37mm complexes. The 120mm main armament could be used for AA barrage, but suffered from its limited elevation and adequate dual-purpose ammunitions. By June 1940, Italian destroyers were not equipped nor trained to conduct anti-submarine warfare. The reason for this would require another video. For the moment, I'm adding an interesting article in the description. As the war progressed, 12 units were fitted with sonar and depth charge launchers, although we must remember that the Italians mainly relied on torpedo boats and corvettes for hunting down submarines. A few units were also equipped with radar devices from mid-1942, although too late and in few numbers to influence the course of operations. Last but not least, Italian destroyers were fitted to carry consistent numbers of mines that played an important factor in the Mediterranean campaign. To draw some conclusions, Italian destroyers experienced several issues and limitations, especially regarding seaworthiness and range, exacerbated by the high naphtha consumption. The seaworthiness problems were solved on a certain number of vessels. However, Italian destroyers carried a smaller gun and torpedo armament compared with British destroyers operating in the Mediterranean. Gunfire suffered from excessive dispersion, while the AA armament was also insufficient and limited improvements could be made. As we saw, the anti-submarine warfare capabilities also remained another major issue. Despite these limitations, the destroyers and their crew fought bravely and paid a heavy toll during the war. Of the 59 pre-war destroyers and the 5 wartime ones, only 12 were still afloat in 1945. I hope you liked this overview on the Italian destroyers. Please consider subscribing to the channel and click on the bell icon to receive future notifications upon the release of new videos. As always, sources are in the description, together with the links to my social media pages. Good luck and fair seas!